Welcome to Reaction. Today we're talking about the Great Reopening, and that's the process by which the UK government has announced that COVID restrictions are pretty much going to end. They're asking us to exercise some personal responsibility and all of that, and there are new relaxations that have been announced this morning. Tim Montgomerie, my Reaction colleague who joins me now. So the government has announced this great move. It doesn't feel like Liberation Day or Freedom Day in the way that they hoped, and people are understandably nervous about what's happening with the Delta variant. Do you feel that they've just about got it right, or are they in danger of being kiboshed by that Delta variant that I mentioned?
I think probably they have got the destination right. I think when Boris Johnson and the previous Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, announced a delay to Freedom Day, for want of a better expression, they were worried about trends in the Delta variant. And I think we now have the benefit of more data, and those trends haven't continued on the scale that was feared. The fact is that the vaccination program, the vaccines that we already have deployed, are proving to be very effective at combating the Delta variant. The level of hospitalization, let alone death ratio compared to infections, is very, very much lower, 24 times lower, I think, is the number that Sajid Javid, the new Health Secretary, gave at the weekend. So I think it's the right position. I think the difficulty for the government is that they've gone from very recently urging caution on the public and explaining to the public why they need to be cautious. And they've gone very quickly to a very liberal, very permissive position, almost on the turn of a coin. And I think that explains why we've had some of the negative reaction that we've had. And I certainly worry that, for example, on lifting the masks as a compulsory thing to wear on public transport, they may have taken one step too quickly. I think there's a difference between, for example, allowing a pretty full liberalization in restaurants and places of entertainment where people can freely choose to go or not to go. But lots of more vulnerable people who've had to self-isolate over the last year and a half, they have to use public transport. And I think there may have been a case for continued compulsion there, at least for a longer period, just for reassurance as much as anything else.
Yeah. Do you think, though, that they're trying to emphasize that this is a shift back towards personal responsibility? What could possibly go wrong in those circumstances? Because you can imagine a situation which, as you described, someone on public transport who's vulnerable and who feels at risk and is at risk. Yeah. Attempt to be, being upbraided for reminding someone to wear a mask, because some people are very militant about it. I mean, personally, I can't stand them, but wear them willingly, or I understand why. And it's on public transport, particularly on the tube or on the bus, it's something which protects other people, and it's an act that millions of people undergo in a selfless way in order to try and protect others. I do think that the politics, the backdrop of this is really intriguing, because it's almost as though the appointment of a new health secretary in rather bizarre circumstances gives the government a chance to reset. And I think what Sajid Javid is doing very cleverly, whether he's got the pitch precisely right in terms of the language, is that he's doing something which he'll have learnt in his very successful business career and banking career, in that he's not missing that crucial first week and first month where you can reset the team that works around you, and what used to be called kitchen sinking it. You can turn up and absolutely throw everything in, not necessarily just blaming the previous regime, but you're inheriting something which is a tired system after the events of the last 18 months, where people are tired and people are fractious, and you get a chance to reset and instill some new energy and some new systems and a new way of thinking. And that's what he would have done if you took over a new trading team, for example. It's a classic management technique. And I think for that reason, I can understand the difficulty in getting the language quite right. I think he used the term irreversible, which nothing in this crisis is irreversible. We're only at the fourth letter in the Greek alphabet, as the historian Neil Ferguson always reminds us when it comes to this crisis. So there's a lot that lies ahead, but the direction, that new sense of energy, I rather like, because I think, and I was going to ask you in a second, Tim, whether in this crisis, as we move through the next phase, is there stuff about the politics or things that you think that you got wrong? I'll certainly admit to plenty of things that I've got wrong in the last 18 months. But I do think while it's not binary, reopening and locking down society and the economy, there has to be some sort of shade of grey. I do rather like, and I warm to the idea of a health secretary and an approach which takes as its starting point, we cannot run a society like this in perpetuity, and that actually freedom, personal responsibility, common sense, and adjusting measures up and down in a sort of rational, reasonable way, rather than the nation hiding underneath the stairs for the foreseeable future, next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. I welcome that. So on the pandemic, then, Tim, the politics of the pandemic. When it started, I have to say I put quite a lot of faith. Maybe it says something about my residual faith in the British state, which Dominic Cummings would laugh at. But I kind of thought they knew what they were doing, and I thought that there was a plan, and believed the idea that we had a fairly sophisticated pandemic plan. As Jeremy Hunt pointed out, that turned out not to be the case. We had a plan as a country for flu. And then I suppose I was very much in favor of urgent reopening last summer and trying to crack on with it, and was maybe a bit blasé about the variants which emerged. I mean, since then we've had 2 which have transmitted, certainly one transmits a lot faster. How do you sort of look back on the last 18 months in terms of your view of the politics? Like me, you're worried about liberty, you're worried about the implications, but you're also realistic about the health concerns.
Yeah, it's a massive question, and I think the whole Western world in particular, and I emphasize the Western world because we've seen particularly Eastern economies take a different and sort of more technologically sophisticated approach to these questions. But I think the whole Western world will need to reflect on this period very carefully. And I think there were things that were decided upon instantly that now look like they were mistaken, from small things like the perspex barriers that we've had put up in restaurants and shops. They now look like, rather than protecting people, that they reduced ventilation and so probably worsen things. I think there are much bigger questions as to whether we lock down too quickly or too slowly, and then whether then to compensate for locking down too slowly, we then let the lockdowns go on for too long. Whether we were too slow to take advantage of the huge vaccine bonus that countries like Britain had. So my own view, I think it's yours as well, Iain, in 3 to 5 years' time, I think there will be widespread disillusionment with the whole idea of extended lockdowns. I think once the extent of mental health, failure to diagnose cancer, educational problems, the gutting of many small businesses, I think there will be little support for extended lockdowns. And the problem, of course, is that we've had very little opportunity to compare different models. Some people have suggested it would have been much better if older, the most vulnerable people, isolated early in the crisis, and that the state paid them money to do so and encourage them to do that. We haven't had really the comparison of 1 or 2 countries doing that versus the sort of more crude, comprehensive lockdown that we've seen in places like Britain. And hopefully there won't be another imminent opportunity to test different approaches to lockdown. But if we are again faced with another variant that really requires drastic action. Hopefully different countries might actually pursue different policy responses to the question, and we can actually see what works best.
I wonder whether it's going to feed into, and you mentioned the Eastern economies who've taken a different, more technologically driven approach, more scientific approach. I wonder whether this will feed into a longer term debate. Maybe we're just in the middle of it with the rise of China and Asia, and the Asian economies, about Western notions of superiority. And I'm great defender of the West, and think that the democracies need to regroup and organize properly. But still, some of the assumptions, maybe it's even there in what happened in the aftermath of 9/11. We're approaching the anniversary, and then in Iraq, and then now with the West broadly mishandling a pandemic. You can see it in terms of a long end of the Cold War, or post that Western triumphalism. This story of the West having its assumptions of technological and moral superiority challenged in a really, really interesting way. I mean, I could just, in anecdotal terms, that feeling of seeing masks on the tube in January or February with tourists from China, or by that stage probably Japan or South Korea, and feeling, although of course I've been to Tokyo and seen how it's a perfectly normal thing and people do it to protect other people at times of risk or in the winter, but feeling somehow that this was ridiculous and a challenge to, that's simply not what we need to do in Western Europe. This is obviously a disease that's come from a long way away. It would automatically do as much, far more havoc there than it would here, which is mad when you think about it. And also when you consider the experience of pandemics and diseases through post the First World War period, 1957, then in the 60s. And we've had this period where we've actually been very lucky to have avoided pandemics in Western Europe, but we're going to have to adjust our assumptions accordingly. What does the next 10, 20 years look like? That I'm going to be discussing that with Neil Ferguson in our event, and we'll post that on our podcast as well for Reaction listeners. It was a Reaction event happening this evening. And I just wonder, it's that kind of long tail effect, that we're humbled by it almost. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think we should be. And I think also in terms of something else that, we talk about, our response to the crisis, just the general willingness of the British people, certainly early on in the crisis, to comply with these measures. I don't think the government expected the level of compliance, for example, in the first lockdown that they received. The British people were generally frightened, and they've remained more frightened about this disease throughout the whole history of the last 18 months than I'd expected or anticipated. And I think that has perhaps as much as the technological and other things that you mentioned, that psychological understanding of who the British people are. We're an older population now, perhaps more worried about health and risk than we'd anticipated. I think that needs to factor into government considerations. It certainly needs to factor into political leadership. I think there's very little sort of attempt to educate the public about real risk levels and the relative risks of various forms of behavior. And I certainly think, in all the inquiries that need to take place in the next few years as we reflect on what's happened, I'd like to see the BBC in particular, our public service broadcaster, reflect on how it's presented the death rates and whether there's been enough putting into context of the challenges that we faced, because the maintenance, I think, of public anxiety has partly been fed by, I think, some irresponsible broadcasting. And BBC audience levels were very high, particularly in those early months of the pandemic. People turned to the nation's broadcaster as an authoritative source. And I don't accuse anyone at the BBC of, deliberately misleading or frightening people, but I definitely think they contributed to an exaggerated level of fear. And I think there
Yeah.
should be some examination of that, because if we are to better manage these challenges in the future, public information and how it is communicated is so important. And the public service broadcaster, dominantly providing 70% of the news, broadcast news that the British people consume, has a particular responsibility.
I think it's also revealed or exposed yet again that we struggle to talk and think in the modern consumerist West about death. Various books written about this in the last 10, 20 years. And one of the effects of that is that, and opinion pollsters, please get in touch if I'm wrong here, but I don't think there is a widespread understanding of how many people die in a normal day or how many people die in a normal winter. Now, of course, huge numbers of people were dying of COVID at the worst of the crisis this winter, and then in the previous peak. So I'm not for 1 second diminishing it, but if they do want to reintroduce some sense of risk and proportion, which we do in all manner of other stuff, whether it be road deaths or personal safety, these are the trade-offs for a free society. But people then didn't have the ammunition or the understanding of how this sits in context to the general level of deaths. Also, I hadn't thought about your point before about an older population changing that risk dynamic. I had thought that the response of the public, which is wrong, I think, in my views, my interpretation was wrong. I thought it had its roots in the Second World War and a folk memory of collectivism and collective action and common struggle. I don't think it, I mean, if you look at the demographics, that can't be the case. Just in terms of how far we are away from that period. It is presumably just what you described, plus this being a terrible disease, which particularly targets or particularly hits people over the age of 50 or 60. So we've ranged a long way there from whether the UK government has got it right in terms of the great reopening. Lots to discuss, and we'll discuss more of this and other themes on our regular conversations on Reaction on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, it's really straightforward. Just hit the subscribe button before, like this video. Also, and if you're not a subscriber to Reaction, the main site, and you want invites to our live events, which I'm glad to say are back, and you want access to all of the journalism produced by the team and my weekly newsletter on politics, go to the site. It's really straightforward, easy to sign up, and there's a 30-day free trial. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us.